Okay, students, this tutorial is just to give you some demonstrations on the intervals, the subject of intervals. I wanted to do just a demonstration of what these intervals look like in a digital audio environment, and then also let you hear them, and then just talk a little bit about like why are we even worrying about what the distance between two notes is, and why do we give that a name? Um, I think when as you're starting to learn what a lot of people call music theory, and I don't really call this music theory. I think this is just kind of naming. We're just learning some names of different things in music. Um, but the reason why you learn names for different things is just so you can talk about kind of more and more complex devices and things with other people and use really specific language so that they understand what you're talking about, right? And kind of the smallest building blocks in music are just individual notes, right? And so in our, we just did an assignment where you learned just a little bit about notes and note names. And then they showed you a little bit about how you can organize those notes in a certain order, and then you get these things called scales. And scales are just collections of notes that, when they play are played next to each other, they kind of have a different feel to them, right? And I think kind of going in a different direction, there's these things called intervals, and where when you're talking about intervals, you're just talking really about two notes and how far apart they are from each other. And how far apart from each other really gives a different kind of flavor. The two individual notes have a identity all on their own, but when you play them together or right next to each other, they kind of create this new thing out of the two of them, right? And putting two notes together is kind of the first building block in building up a part of music that we call harmony, or a lot of people think about chords and chord progressions and things like that as kind of like these building blocks for songs. And so to talk about intervals, we're really just talking about just two notes and how they work together, and the kind of maybe the kind of feeling that they create when they're played together. Um, so there's kind of two objectives with this assignment. One of them is to get you to start listening to how two notes interact and what that sounds like. And then also for you to learn the names of some specific intervals that we're going to be encountering a lot in music. Okay. And in this assignment later on, you're going to actually go through and make a list of different popular songs that you've heard already that have these intervals in them as a part of their melody. And so you can, like, when you're thinking about like what is a perfect unison sound like, or what does a minor third sound like, you're actually thinking of a song that you already know, and you can kind of hear it in your head what it sounds like. I think that's a really useful thing. That's something that I learned as a young kid, and it's still stuck with me to this day. When I think about, like the sound of a perfect fourth, to me, the song that I learned for that was the Bridal March, the "Here Comes the Da 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 Da." That song that has a perfect fourth at the beginning of it, right? So I always think of that when I hear it in another song. I think, oh, it's a perfect fourth because it sounds just like that song. And then that helps me figure out how to play that and how to use that in my own music, right? So let's go ahead and go through all these intervals. I've programmed them in Ableton just so I can play them back and we can hear them and see what they look like in a MIDI roll type of thing as well. So I'm going to make this window just a little bit bigger here. And we'll start out with the perfect one, or sometimes we call that a unison, which really is just, it's the same note. It's not really much of an interval because it's just two of the exact same note. And I'm going to play these, and what you'll hear is first you'll hear the two notes separately, and then you'll hear the two notes together. And that won't really make sense until we get to some bigger intervals than the unison, but I'll start there. So this is the unison. Okay, and when it's really the same pitch, it sounds the same. The only time that I think that a unison really makes sense is maybe if two different instruments are playing the same note, and then you can hear the same note, but you can hear that it's played by two different tones, and that creates this certain vibe when they're in unison that way. Here's a minor second, or sometimes we call this a half step. Okay, and you can see that these notes are just right next to each other, so they're first played separately and then together. And you can hear when it's played together, it's really this very dissonant is what we call it, kind of an angry sound, because those two notes are so close together but not not the same note, right? It's like I always think of like if someone's standing too close to you, right, and it just gets uncomfortable. That's kind of how these two notes make me feel. The next interval is a major second, or sometimes we call it a whole step, and it's just one step bigger. So now these at least have a little bit of space between them, right? And I think they're a little bit more at rest with each other. There's still some tension there when they're played together, but not as much as the minor second. Let's go to the next one. This is the minor third, okay? Major third. Good. And you'll kind of probably notice that the further apart we get, they kind of sound like the two notes exist together a little bit more peacefully. And that happens to a certain point. You're going to start to hear some tension come back in as we go down this list here. So here is the perfect fourth, and this is the one that I told you earlier sounds like Here Comes the Bride. See if you can hear it. That Here Comes the Bride, right? That's the perfect fourth. Here's the tritone. This is a weird one. It's kind of got some dissonance there again, right? And just to kind of give you an idea about where we're at right now on the list is we're about halfway down the list right now. So this midpoint is like dissonant again, right? Where generally like kind of started out dissonant and then it kind of got more and more consonant as we went through, or more at rest. We get to this one and it's like, ooh, lots of dissonance again, right? So that's the tritone. And now on to the perfect fifth. Very stable, sounds like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? That's the beginning of the alphabet song, is that interval. Minor six. Little dissonant on that one, maybe. Pretty big intervals now. Here's the major sixth. Minor seventh. Kind of dissonant again. Major seventh. Really dissonant there. And I'll explain why in just a minute. Here's the last one, octave, or the perfect eighth. Yeah, and that should sound pretty consonant to you, or at rest when we get to the perfect eighth. And let me explain this a little bit. So all of these intervals I just started from C3, which on a piano would be like the note right in the middle of the piano. And then I just went up from that point to create these different intervals. And so it just kind of slowly got bigger and bigger and bigger as we went. By the time you get up to the perfect eight, or the octave, that is when we get up to the next C. So it's C4, right? And those notes are exactly very harmonious. They sit together very nice, and that's why they're both called C. If you were to look at it from a frequency spectrum, notes are just vibrations, and so we can measure them as a frequency. The pitch, the frequency of the note C3, and the frequency of the C4, their relationship to each other is that C4 is exactly twice as fast of a frequency as C3. And so because of that, it's a double as speed. They just, those two vibrations really sit well together, kind of. And then you can kind of think of any of these other intervals, they're just different fractions of that doubling, right? And so sometimes you're going to have two vibrations that really fight each other and create a sense of kind of like unease or tension, and that's what we call dissonance. And then other intervals are going to naturally kind of harmonically align their vibrations, and they're going to just naturally feel more at rest because their vibrations are naturally more cooperative with each other, and they're not fighting each other so much, right? It's kind of an interesting thing to think about when you think about it in a physical kind of standpoint, and then you also think about how that makes you feel and what it sounds like, right? Because they're all correlated. So that is just a quick preview on intervals. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding. I know it's one thing to just read about them, but I think when you hear them and see them, that it does start to make more sense. And for the next step, what I want you to do is watch the next tutorial video, please, and then it will walk you through, you're going to go through this website and listen to some different songs that have these different intervals in them, and then you're going to make a list that will be kind of your reference list for yourself personally, so that you know, like, hey, this song has got a minor third in it right at the beginning, and I can hear it, and that's how I'm going to remember what that sounds like. So hopefully it'll help make this concept of an interval. You'll be able to remember what it sounds like. You'll be able to remember what the name is, and then you'll also have this kind of reference point of at least one other song where that interval exists. So hopefully that'll kind of really drive home this concept. And then later on, when we do some other assignments where we're starting to make your own songs, look for these intervals in your music, and see how you can use them to create different emotions and feelings in your music. That's it for this. Good luck with your intervals.